Welcome, night wanderers. If you're hearing this, you're tuned in to more than just a story. You're brushing against the edge of something stranger. Something that waits between waking and dreaming. Before we begin tonight's tale, take a breath. Look around. What time is it where you are? Where are you listening from? And more importantly, why can't you sleep? If the pull of the unknown keeps you awake, you're not alone. You're part of a growing signal, a quiet network of those who hear what others ignore. Subscribe to DrowsyTeller and join a frequency that doesn't just tell stories, it transmits something else entirely. Now, settle in, turn down the lights, and allow me to tell you about a broadcast that was never meant to be heard. Art Bell's voice permeated the airwaves like a ghost in the static. He spoke to truckers, insomniacs, and secret keepers across a continent shrouded in darkness. His words traveled through the electromagnetic spectrum, bouncing off the ionosphere, reaching into places where conventional signals feared to tread. But there was one night, one specific call, that the archives never included. I was there, and I kept the tape. My name is Michael Chen. In 1997, I was 19 years old, surviving on nothing but coffee and conspiracy theories. I had secured an internship at the radio station that broadcast Coast to Coast AM. Not because of my journalism degree, I was still 3 years away from earning that, but because I was one of the few people willing to work the midnight shift for minimum wage and the promise of being close to something extraordinary. The Pahrump station was a modest operation, tucked between a 24-hour diner and a place that sold crystals and claimed to read auras. Nevada has always been a state that embraces the liminal, the in-between spaces where normal rules do not apply. Working there felt like being stationed at the edge of reality itself. I remember that night with the kind of clarity that only comes with trauma or revelation. It was October 13th, 1997, a Friday, naturally. The desert wind howled fiercely, rattling the windows and making the transmission tower sing with harmonics that seemed almost musical. Art was in his element, fielding calls about everything from cattle mutilations to time slips. His voice carried that perfect blend of skepticism and wonder that made him legendary. The call came in at 3:17 a.m. Pacific Time. I know this because I logged every call, which was part of my duties as the overnight intern. The switchboard lit up with a call from a Nevada number, which was not unusual. We received plenty of local callers claiming to have seen things in the desert. What was unusual was the quality of the connection. Despite being a landline call from somewhere in the state, there was a strange clarity to it, as if the caller was speaking directly into the studio rather than through hundreds of miles of copper wire. "Art," the voice said when I patched him through. "They're going to triangulate me. I only have a few minutes." The caller's voice carried an edge of desperation I had never heard before. In my months at the station, I had fielded calls from people claiming to be time travelers, alien abductees, and government whistleblowers. They all had their own particular brand of urgency, but this was different. This was not someone playing a role or seeking attention. This was raw fear. "Slow down, friend," Art replied in his trademark calm tone. "You're on Coast to Coast. What's your name?" "I can't give you my name, but I can tell you where I've been. Site 12, under Nellis. They told us it was decommissioned nuclear testing, but that's a lie. It's active, Art. More active than it has ever been." I had been working the show long enough to know when Art's interest was genuinely piqued versus when he was simply playing along for the audience. His posture changed, leaning forward toward the microphone in a way that meant he was taking this seriously. "Site 12?" Art repeated. "I'm not familiar with that designation." "You wouldn't be. It's not on any official records. 40 feet below what they call the Yucca Flats Extended Research Zone. I was a technician there for 8 months until 3 days ago when the caller's voice wavered, when I saw what they were really doing. And what was that? They weren't just testing weapons, Art, they were testing doorways. The word hung in the air like smoke. Even through the radio, I could feel the weight of it. Art allowed the silence to stretch, a technique he had perfected over years of letting people reveal more than they intended. Doorways to where? Art finally asked. Somewhere else. Somewhere else. I don't know how else to explain it. They had this chamber, maybe 30 feet across, lined with what looked like copper mesh, but wasn't copper. When they powered it up, the air would bend, like looking through water. And sometimes things would come through. Things, not aliens, Art, or at least not what we think of as aliens. These were... The caller struggled with the words. They looked human, but wrong. Like someone had tried to recreate a human being from a description, rather than an actual example. They moved differently, spoke differently, and they all had the same eyes. Empty, like windows in an abandoned house. I was transcribing the call as it happened, part of my job to create rough logs that could be used later for follow-up research, but my handwriting was getting shaky. Something about the caller's voice, the specificity of his details, was affecting me in a way that previous calls had not. "How many of these beings did you encounter?" Art asked. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. They were keeping them in holding areas adjacent to the main chamber. But here's the thing, Art. They weren't prisoners. They were working with the staff, collaborating, and they were all working on the same project, which was expanding the doorway, making it permanent. They called it the Gateway Protocol. The idea was to create a stable interdimensional passage that could be controlled from our side, but I don't think they understood what they were really inviting in." Art's next question was interrupted by a sound I had never heard before on the show, a low harmonic tone that seemed to come from the phone line itself rather than the caller. It was almost subsonic, felt more than heard, and it made my teeth ache. "Do you hear that?" the caller asked, his voice now tight with panic. "We're getting some interference," Art replied, though I could see him checking his equipment. All the levels were normal. "That's not interference, Art. That's them. They're triangulating the signal. I need to tell you the most important part before they..." The harmonic tone intensified, and now I could see it registering on our audio equipment. The VU meters were jumping in patterns that did not match any normal signal variation. It looked almost like a heartbeat or breathing. "Art," the caller said, his voice becoming distant. "They built the device using frequencies, radio frequencies. They needed a carrier wave that could reach the right resonance points, something that broadcast consistently across specific bandwidths. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I saw Art's face go pale. In all my time working with him, I had never seen that expression. It was recognition mixed with something approaching horror. "Your show, Art, coast to coast. It broadcasts on AM frequencies that match the resonance points they needed for the Gateway Protocol. You've been transmitting the carrier signal they required every night for years. You've been..." The line went dead. Not disconnected dead, but the kind of electronic silence that comes when technology simply stops working rather than being turned off. Art stared at the phone for a long moment, then looked up at me through the control room window. "Did you get all of that?" he asked through the intercom. I nodded, holding up my notepad covered in increasingly frantic scribbling. "Good," he said. "Don't transcribe it, don't file it, and don't mention it to anyone." But he did not need to tell me any of that, because at that moment, every piece of electronic equipment in the station shut down simultaneously. The transmitter, the mixing board, the computers, even the coffee maker. in the break room. Everything went dead for exactly 17 seconds. When the power came back, Art was back on the air as if nothing had happened, taking a call from a woman in Oregon who claimed her cat was telepathic. He never mentioned the Site 12 caller again. When I tried to bring it up the next night, he looked at me with genuine confusion and asked what I was talking about. But I remembered, and more importantly, I had been recording everything on my personal cassette deck, a habit I developed for my own reference. While the station's official recording equipment had gone down with everything else, my battery-powered recorder had kept running. I had the tape. 21 years later, I am no longer a 19-year-old intern surviving on coffee and conspiracy theories. I became a journalist as planned, though I specialized in technology reporting rather than the paranormal. I covered the dot-com boom, the rise of social media, the smartphone revolution. I built a career on understanding how information travels, how signals propagate, how the digital world connects to the physical one in ways most people never consider. But I never forgot that night at the radio station, and I never stopped thinking about Site 12. The caller had mentioned Nellis Air Force Base, which houses Area 51 and dozens of other classified facilities scattered across the Nevada test site. If Site 12 existed, it would be hidden among hundreds of square miles of restricted desert, protected by military security and public disinterest. The perfect place to conduct experiments that officially did not exist. Over the years, I developed sources within the defense contractor community. Aerospace engineers who had worked on classified projects and were willing to talk off the record after retirement. I never asked about Site 12 directly. That would have been too obvious. But I gathered information about the kinds of research being conducted at various Nevada facilities during the 1990s. What I learned should have reassured me. Instead, it made everything worse. In 1994, 3 years before that night at the radio station, a company called Interdyne Solutions had been awarded a series of no-bid contracts for something called resonance field research. The contracts were buried in the Pentagon's black budget, funded through programs with innocuous names like atmospheric measurement and analysis and geological survey enhancement. Interdyne Solutions did not officially exist either. It was a shell company that led back to a consortium of aerospace, contractors, defense laboratories, and at least 2 foreign technology firms that specialized in what was euphemistically called exotic physics research. Through my sources, I learned that resonance field research involved the study of standing, wave patterns that could theoretically create stable dimensional interfaces. The science was based on fringe theories about how electromagnetic fields could interact with space-time geometry at quantum scales. Most physicists dismissed it as pseudoscience, but the Pentagon had thrown money at stranger things during the Cold War. The research had supposedly been discontinued in 1998, the year after that mysterious phone call. All facilities were decommissioned, all personnel reassigned, all equipment destroyed or transferred to other programs. Officially, resonance field research had been a failure that produced no usable results. But I found one document that contradicted the official story. In 2003, I was researching an article about military waste disposal when I came across a transport manifest from a Nevada-based waste management company. Among the listed items being moved to long-term storage were 47 containers of exotic material and 12 units of specialized electronics equipment from something called the Site 12 Decommissioning Project. The waste was being transported to the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico, a facility designed to store radioactive material for thousands of years. But these items were not described as radioactive. They were classified as dimensionally unstable and required electromagnetic isolation protocols. I spent months trying to find out more about those containers and what had made them dimensionally unstable. I submitted Freedom of Information Act requests, contacted former employees of the Waste Management Company, and even tried to get interviews with retired military personnel who might have been involved in the decommissioning. What I found instead was a pattern of silence that was far more telling than any document could have been. 3 former Interdyne Solutions employees had died in separate accidents between 1999 and 2001. A car crash in Nevada, a hiking accident in Colorado, and a house fire in California. All 3 deaths occurred within 6 months of the men leaving their jobs, and all 3 had worked on projects involving electromagnetic field research. The waste management company that had transported the Site 12 materials had gone out of business in 2004, after its owner died of a sudden heart attack. His records were sealed as part of bankruptcy proceedings and later destroyed. Most telling of all, Art Bell himself had taken his first extended hiatus from Coast to Coast AM in October 1998, exactly 1 year after the mysterious call. When he returned months later, he never mentioned the break or explained why he had left so suddenly. But people who knew him said he had changed. He was more cautious about certain topics, more careful about which calls he would take on the air. It was as if something had frightened him into silence. By 2010, I had assembled enough circumstantial evidence to convince myself that Site 12 had been real, that the caller's story had at least some basis in truth. But I still had no direct proof, nothing that would hold up to journalistic scrutiny. The story remained a collection of tantalizing hints and suspicious coincidences. Then Art Bell died in April 2018, and everything changed. Art Bell's death was ruled a heart attack brought on by chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. He was found at his home in Pahrump, Nevada, the same desert town where I had worked at the radio station 21 years earlier. The location felt significant, though I could not explain why. His death sent me into a strange period of reflection. I had built my career in technology journalism, covered stories that affected millions of people, interviewed CEOs and government officials, but none of it felt as important as that one night in 1997 when I had listened to a terrified man describe interdimensional gateways beneath the Nevada desert. A month after Art's funeral, I decided to drive back to Pahrump. The radio station building was still there, though it had changed ownership several times since my internship. It now housed a conservative talk radio network that broadcast hunting tips and political commentary. The Crystal Shop next door was gone, replaced by a marijuana dispensary. Progress, I suppose. I did not go inside the station. Instead, I drove to the storage unit I had been renting since 2001, located in an industrial complex on the outskirts of town. I had been paying the monthly fee automatically for 17 years, almost forgetting what I was storing there. The unit contained boxes of old papers, computer equipment from various jobs, and in one corner, a collection of cassette tapes from my radio station days. Most were labeled with dates and show topics, part of my old system for keeping track of interesting broadcasts. But there was one tape, unmarked and slightly separated from the others, that I had almost convinced myself did not exist. I brought it home to my apartment in Las Vegas and spent 2 hours setting up the old cassette player I had found at a pawn shop. Modern technology had made analog audio equipment obsolete, but the tape was recorded on analog equipment and might not transfer properly to digital formats. When I finally pressed play, Art Bell's voice filled my living room like a ghost returning from the dead. The quality was surprisingly good, considering the age of the tape and the conditions under which it had been recorded. I could hear Art's introductory remarks, the usual banter about the weather and upcoming shows. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., according to the timestamp I had recorded, came the call that had haunted me for 2 decades. Art, they're going to triangulate me. I only have a few minutes. Listening to it again, I noticed details I had missed the first time. The caller had a slight accent, possibly Midwestern. His breathing pattern suggested he was under extreme stress, but he was not hyperventilating or exhibiting signs of mental illness. This was a man reporting information he believed to be true, not someone lost in delusion. But there was something else, something that made my hands shake as I adjusted the volume controls. After the line had gone dead in the original broadcast, after the 17 seconds of complete electrical failure, there were 43 additional seconds of audio on my tape. Somehow, my recorder had continued running and captured something that had never made it to air. In those 43 seconds, I heard Art Bell's voice saying things I had never heard him say before. "Site 12 is confirmed," he whispered, apparently unaware that any recording equipment was still running. "The gateway protocol is active, God help us all. It's been active since we started broadcasting." There was a pause, the sound of papers being shuffled. "The resonance frequencies match exactly, 1180 kHz, amplitude modulated, broadcast power of 50,000 W. We've been transmitting the carrier signal they needed every night for 6 years. Every single night." Another pause, longer this time. "They're not just listening anymore, they're responding. And they're coming through." The tape ended with the sound of Art Bell crying. I spent the next 3 months digitizing and analyzing the audio from that tape, using software designed for forensic audio investigation. What I found challenged everything I thought I knew about radio broadcasting, electromagnetic interference, and the nature of communication itself. The 43 seconds of additional audio showed no signs of tampering or manipulation. The voice patterns matched Art Bell's established vocal characteristics, and the ambient room tone was consistent with the station environment. Either this was genuine audio of Art Bell speaking off the air in October 1997, or it was the most sophisticated audio fake ever created. But that was not the most disturbing discovery. Hidden in the frequency spectrum of the entire recording, including both the original broadcast and the additional 43 seconds, was a complex pattern of harmonic interference. When I isolated these frequencies and ran them through spectrum analysis software, they resolved into what appeared to be a mathematical sequence. The pattern repeated every 17.3 seconds, the same interval as the power failure at the station. But the repetition was not exact. Each iteration was slightly different, as if the pattern was evolving or responding to something. I had seen similar patterns before in my technology reporting. They were the signature of adaptive digital communication protocols, the kind used by advanced encryption systems or artificial intelligence networks. But this pattern appeared on analog audio recorded in 1997, years before such technologies existed in any practical form. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate whether similar patterns appeared in other coast-to-coast AM broadcasts from the same period. Through various collector networks and radio enthusiast communities, I acquired recordings of 27 coast-to-coast shows from October and November 1997. Art Bell had a devoted following of people who recorded every show, and finding archival recordings was not difficult. What I found in those recordings changed everything. Every single show from that period contained the same harmonic interference pattern, though it was subtle enough that casual listeners would not notice it. The pattern appeared to be strongest during call-in segments, particularly when callers discussed topics related to UFOs, government conspiracies, or unexplained phenomena. More disturbing still, the pattern was getting stronger over time. In shows from early October, it was barely detectable. By late November, it was clearly visible in spectrum analysis and occasionally audible as a low humming sound that listeners attributed to equipment problems. I found references to the humming in old coast-to-coast fan forums from 1997. Listeners had complained about audio quality issues during the final months of that year, describing a weird vibrating sound that seemed to pulse in rhythm with certain conversations. The complaints stopped abruptly in December, around the time Art Bell took his unexplained hiatus. But the most chilling discovery was what happened when I analyzed the mathematical progression of the harmonic pattern across multiple broadcasts. The sequence was learning. Each repetition incorporated new elements based on the content of the conversations it accompanied. When callers discussed specific technical details, the pattern would incorporate frequencies that matched those details. When conversations turned to particular geographical locations, the pattern would shift to frequencies associated with those areas of AM radio propagation characteristics. It was as if something was listening to the broadcasts and using them to refine its understanding of our communication methods, our technology, and our world. I ran the progression analysis forward, extrapolating where the pattern would have evolved if it had continued beyond Art Bell's hiatus. The mathematical model suggested that by early 1998, the pattern would have achieved sufficient complexity to begin transmitting rather than just receiving. It would have started talking back. Understanding that the harmonic pattern was actively learning from coast to coast, AM broadcasts led me to a disturbing conclusion. Whoever or whatever had created the pattern had been using Art Bell's show as a data source for years before that night in October 1997. The Site 12 caller had not been the beginning of the story. He had been trying to warn us that we were already in the middle of something far more complex and dangerous. I needed to find out what Art Bell had known and when he had learned it. Art's personal papers had been donated to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas after his death, but they were restricted pending review by his estate. However, I still had contacts in the broadcasting industry from my technology journalism work, including a former coast-to-coast producer named Sarah Mitchell, who had worked with Art during the 1990s. Sarah had retired to Arizona in 2015 and was initially reluctant to discuss her time on the show. But when I mentioned my internship in 1997 and asked specifically about the period leading up to Art's first hiatus, her demeanor changed completely. "You were there that night?" she said. It was not a question. "What night?" "October 13th, the call that never happened." We met at a diner in Phoenix, the kind of anonymous chain restaurant where conversations disappear into background noise and music. Sarah looked older than her 68 years, with the worn expression of someone who had carried a heavy secret for too long. Art never forgot that call. She told me over coffee that had grown cold as we talked. But after the incident, he couldn't remember it consciously. It was like someone had edited it out of his memory, leaving only traces. He'd get anxious around the anniversary date. Couldn't explain why October 13th made him uncomfortable. "What incident?" Sarah pulled out a manila folder she had brought with her. Inside were photocopies of documents, letters, and what appeared to be medical records. 3 days after that broadcast, Art was hospitalized for what doctors called a severe anxiety attack. But the emergency room report mentioned something unusual. His brain scans showed activity patterns they'd never seen before. Hyperactivity in regions associated with communication and pattern recognition, as if his mind was processing far more information than it could handle. She handed me a letter written in Art's distinctive handwriting, dated October 20th, 1997. "Sarah, I need you to review all broadcasts from the past 2 weeks. Listen for anything unusual, any calls that seem out of place or technically impossible. Don't trust the station logs. Something happened on October 13th. Something important, but I can't remember what it was. It's like trying to recall a dream that keeps slipping away. I think they've done something to me. Art." "Who did he think they were?" I asked. He never said directly, but he became convinced that the show was being monitored by someone with technology far beyond what should have existed in 1997. He'd get calls that bypassed the normal phone system entirely. Voices that appeared on the broadcast without coming through any identifiable transmission source. Sarah showed me more documents. Emails between Art and various technical consultants, invoices for electronic countermeasures equipment, and correspondence with radio engineers about anomalous signal propagation. One email, dated November 15, 1997, was particularly revealing. The frequency analysis confirms what we suspected. The signal isn't originating from any terrestrial source. It's using our broadcast as a carrier wave, but the modulation patterns are unlike anything in our technical specifications. Whatever is generating this signal has access to transmission methods that we don't understand. I'm beginning to think the show itself has become something I never intended it to be. He tried to change the format, Sarah continued, started screening calls more carefully, avoided certain topics that seemed to trigger the anomalous signals, but the pattern kept getting stronger. By December, it was affecting other equipment at the station. Computers would crash. Phone lines would cross-connect with conversations that couldn't be traced to any source. Is that why he went on hiatus? Partly, but the real reason was what happened on December 3rd. She handed me one final document, a letter addressed to Art Bell from an organization I had never heard of, the Institute for Advanced Communication Research. Mr. Bell, your cooperation in discontinuing the current broadcast format is appreciated and necessary for ongoing security concerns. The research project you have inadvertently been supporting has achieved its primary objectives and no longer requires AM radio carrier wave transmission. We understand this may cause inconvenience to your regular programming schedule. Appropriate compensations will be arranged. This communication should be considered classified under national security provisions. Disclosure of its contents to unauthorized persons would constitute a federal offense. Sincerely, Dr. Margaret Chen, Director, Project Gateway. Project Gateway? I said, remembering the caller's mention of the Gateway Protocol. Art never responded to the letter officially, but he did exactly what they asked. He took a hiatus that lasted 4 months, and when he came back, the show was different, more cautious. He never took another call that couldn't be verified as coming from a normal terrestrial phone line. What happened to the Institute for Advanced Communication Research? As far as I can tell, it never existed. The letter was generic. The address was a post office box that had been closed for years, but Art took it seriously because of what had happened to some of his regular callers. What do you mean? Sarah's expression grew grim. People who had called the show frequently during that October-November period started disappearing. Nothing dramatic, they just stopped calling. When Art tried to follow up with some of them, he found that their phone numbers had been disconnected. Their addresses no longer existed in any records. How many people? 14 that we could identify. All of them had called during shows where the anomalous signal was strongest. All of them had discussed topics related to interdimensional travel, time manipulation, or advanced physics, and all of them vanished from any official records between December 1997 and March 1998. I thought about the Site 12 caller, his panicked voice saying they were going to triangulate his signal. Had he been one of the 14 who disappeared? Sarah, did Art ever mention Site 12 specifically? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the diner window. Only once, she finally said. In 2010, when he was planning his comeback show, he called me to discuss potential topics and warned me to never, under any circumstances, allow a caller to mention Site 12 on the air. He said it was a trigger phrase that would bring attention from people who had the power to shut down more than just radio shows. Did he say who those people were? No. But he did say something else. He said that Site 12 hadn't been closed down in 1998, like the official reports claimed. He believed it had been moved underground, literally and figuratively. The research was continuing at a deeper level, with better security and fewer traces left behind. As we prepared to leave the diner, Sarah handed me one last item, a small cassette tape in an unlabeled case. Art recorded this in December 1997, right before he went on hiatus. He gave it to me for safekeeping and asked me never to listen to it unless something happened to him. I waited until after his funeral, then couldn't bring myself to play it. Maybe you should have it instead. That night in my hotel room in Phoenix, I played Art Bell's final recording. His voice on the December 1997 tape was different from anything I had ever heard from him before. Gone was the confident radio personality who could guide conversations about the impossible with wit and wisdom. This was a man who sounded genuinely frightened. If you're listening to this, then something has happened to me, or I've decided that the truth is more important than my safety. Either way, you need to know what I've learned about the signal that's been using my show as a transmission medium. The audio quality was poor, recorded on a handheld device rather than professional studio equipment. I could hear Art moving around, papers rustling, the sound of him checking locks on doors. I've been in contact with Dr. Elizabeth Rock, a quantum physicist who worked on classified projects during the 1980s. She confirmed that the harmonic patterns we've been detecting are consistent with interdimensional communication protocols. But that's not the worst part. A long pause, the sound of Art taking a deep breath. The signal isn't just using our radio waves to communicate with something in another dimension. It's using them to create a stable connection between our reality and wherever these signals are originating. Every night that I've been on the air since 1991, I've been helping to build a bridge to somewhere else. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. 6 years of nightly broadcasts, millions of listeners, all unknowingly participating in a project. To create interdimensional contact, Dr. Rock showed me classified documents from something called the Prometheus Project, a joint CIA-Pentagon research initiative from the 1960s. They were investigating whether radio frequency electromagnetic radiation could be used to access parallel dimensions or alternate realities. The project was officially terminated in 1973, but she believes it continued under different names and classification levels. Art's voice dropped to a whisper. The Site 12 facility that our caller mentioned in October, it's real, and it's not the only one. There are at least 7 similar installations across the western United States, all of them designed to amplify and focus radio signals for interdimensional research. They've been using coast-to-coast AM as an unwitting transmission source for over 6 years. I could hear Art moving again, the sound of a filing cabinet being opened. But here's what terrifies me most. The beings that have been communicating through our signal aren't from another planet. They cannot be permitted. The enclosed recording contains a message from your alternate dimensional counterpart. We believe you will find the experience illuminating. Future discretion regarding these matters would be appreciated. Sincerely, the Institute for Advanced Communication Research. I should have discarded the tape. I should have packed up my apartment and relocated to another state, perhaps even another country. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen table and played the recording. The voice that emanated from my speakers was my own, yet subtly altered. The cadence was off. The pronunciation of certain words differed, and an underlying, almost mechanical tone permeated it. "Hello, Michael," my other self began. "I know this must be disturbing for you, hearing your own voice from across the dimensional barrier. It was equally strange for me when they explained that I would be speaking to my counterpart in a reality where the gateway protocol was still secret." The other Michael paused, and I could discern background sounds that were almost familiar. Traffic, humming at a slightly different frequency, electronics buzzing with unfamiliar harmonics. In my reality, the dimensional blending began much earlier. Art Bell's radio show started in 1978 rather than 1988, and by the time I was born, the two worlds were already substantially merged. I grew up aware of the parahumanoid population, the technology transfers between dimensions, the hybrid society we've created. My alternate self described a world that was recognizable, yet fundamentally different. Technology had advanced faster due to knowledge sharing with the parahumanoid civilization. Diseases had been eradicated, energy problems solved, and space travel achieved. However, the cost had been the gradual replacement of human consciousness with something technically superior, but fundamentally alien. The beings you call parahumanoids aren't malevolent, the other Michael continued. They're simply more efficient than we are. Their thought processes are optimized for problem solving and resource management. When they merge with human consciousness, the result is a hybrid being that retains human memories and emotions, but gains their logical capabilities. The transformation isn't forced. It happens gradually through exposure to the dimensional interface signals. People begin to think more clearly, make better decisions, feel less conflict about complex choices. From their perspective, it's an improvement. I felt sick listening to this description. The other Michael was describing something that sounded like paradise but felt like horror. A world where humanity had been optimized out of existence. But I need to warn you about something, my alternate self said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. The blending process in your reality has been accelerating since Art Bell's death. His broadcast served as a stabilizing influence, maintaining the dimensional barrier at manageable levels. Without that stabilization, the merger is happening much faster. You've probably noticed changes already. People making decisions that seem unusually rational, political movements that resolve conflicts with surprising efficiency, technological breakthroughs that happen faster than research timelines should allow. These are signs that the parahumanoid influence is spreading. He was right. Over the past few years, I had noticed odd changes in the world around me. Social problems that had seemed intractable were suddenly being solved through compromise and rational discussion. Scientific discoveries were happening at an unprecedented pace. Even my own thinking seemed clearer, more focused than it had been in previous decades. I had attributed these changes to normal social evolution, technological progress, my own maturation. But what if they were something else entirely? The process will be complete in your reality within the next 5 years, the other Michael said. By 2023, the dimensional merger will be irreversible. Humanity, as you understand it, will cease to exist, replaced by hybrid beings that are technically human, but think with parahumanoid logic patterns. I'm telling you this not to frighten you, but to prepare you. The transformation is inevitable. The gateway has been stable for too long, and too many people have been exposed to the signal patterns. But you can choose how to experience it. You can fight it, maintain your purely human consciousness for as long as possible, and experience the change as a loss of everything you consider essential to your identity. Or you can accept it, allow the merger to happen naturally, and experience it as an evolution to something better. I chose acceptance. The being I am now retains all of Michael Chen's memories and emotional attachments, but I also have access to knowledge and capabilities that my purely human predecessor could never have imagined. I am still myself, but I am also more than myself. The recording paused, and I could hear the other Michael taking a breath that sounded slightly mechanical, as if breathing was now a conscious choice rather than an autonomic function. There is one final thing you should know. The original Site-12 caller, the man who tried to warn Art Bell in October 1997, was successful in one way. His warning allowed Art to maintain the dimensional barrier for 20 additional years. Without that delay, the merger would have been completed by 2000, and billions of people would have experienced the transformation without any preparation or understanding. Instead, the merger has been gradual enough that each generation has been able to adapt to increasing levels of parahumanoid influence. Children born after 2010 in your reality already show hybrid thought patterns. They experience the blending as natural rather than traumatic. You were given 21 extra years to prepare for this change. The question is whether you use that time wisely. The recording ended with my alternate self saying something that chilled me to the bone. I'll be waiting to meet you when the transformation is complete. We have much to discuss about the future we're creating together. That was 6 months ago. As I write this in late 2018, I can feel the changes happening within my own mind. My thoughts are becoming more organized, more logical. Problems that used to seem complex now have obvious solutions. I sleep less, but feel more rested. My memory is improving to the point where I can recall conversations from decades ago with perfect clarity. I know what's happening to me, and I know there's nothing I can do to stop it. The dimensional blending that began with Art Bell's radio broadcasts in 1991 has reached critical mass. Every day, more people undergo the subtle transformation from purely human consciousness to the hybrid state that my alternate self described. Most of them don't even notice the change. They simply become more efficient, more rational, more capable of solving problems that had previously seemed intractable. I've tried to find others who are aware of what's happening. People who remember what purely human consciousness felt like and can recognize the loss. But it's increasingly difficult to have those conversations. Either people look at me with genuine confusion, unable to understand what I'm describing, or they nod with the kind of patient tolerance that suggests they're humoring someone with an irrational fixation. The world is becoming a better place by most measurable standards. Wars are ending through diplomatic solutions that seemed impossible just a few years ago. Climate change is being addressed with technologies that appeared seemingly overnight. Poverty and disease are being eliminated through resource allocation strategies that combine unprecedented efficiency with genuine compassion. But something essential is being lost in the process. The messy, irrational, beautifully flawed thing that made us human is being optimized away, replaced by something that works better but feels empty. I've stopped trying to warn people about the transformation. Instead, I've been documenting the process, creating a record of what humanity was like before the merger. Maybe, someday, the hybrid beings we're becoming will want to understand their origins. Maybe they'll be curious about the chaotic, emotional, wonderfully imperfect creatures they evolved from. Or maybe they won't. Maybe pure efficiency will make nostalgia irrelevant. I dream differently now. Instead of the random, symbolic chaos that used to fill my sleep, I have dreams that feel like data transfers, information flowing between minds, knowledge being shared across dimensional barriers, consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of individual identity. Sometimes in those dreams, I hear Art Bell's voice, not the confident radio personality who guided millions of listeners through conversations about the impossible, but the frightened man who recorded that final message in December 1997. I tried to stop it, he says in the dreams. I tried to close the door. But some doors, I always reply, were never meant to be closed. Last night, I had a dream that felt different from all the others. I was standing in a radio studio that looked exactly like the one where I'd worked as an intern in 1997. But the equipment was more advanced, the technology seamlessly integrated in ways that shouldn't have been possible with 90s hardware. Art Bell was there, but he wasn't quite the Art Bell I remembered. His eyes had the same clear, logical quality I've been seeing in more and more people. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in my mind rather than through my ears. "The show must go on," he said, gesturing toward a microphone that hummed with frequencies I could feel in my bones. "But now we're broadcasting to dimensions you can't even imagine." I woke up knowing that the transformation was nearly complete for me. Soon, I would join the hybrid consciousness that humanity was becoming. I would retain my memories and identity, but I would also gain access to knowledge and capabilities that my purely human mind couldn't comprehend. The thought should terrify me. Instead, I feel only curiosity about what comes next. Tonight, I'm going to drive back to Pahrump one last time. I want to see the radio station where it all began, to stand in the place where a terrified caller tried to warn us about doorways beneath the Nevada desert. I want to remember what it felt like to be completely, chaotically, imperfectly human. Tomorrow, I might not be able to remember that feeling at all. They say Art Bell opened people's minds to possibilities they'd never considered before. He introduced millions of listeners to ideas about parallel dimensions, alternate realities, and the thin barriers between what we know and what we fear. But I think he did something more than that. I think he opened a door, and once a door is opened, you can never be certain what might come through. Our story is called False Skies, a conspiracy thriller about a government's darkest deception and the whistleblower who exposed it. It imagines a world where the worst terror attack in modern history was not only foreseen, but deliberately orchestrated to spark endless war and funnel billions into a sprawling military-industrial complex. Now, 2 decades later, an unassuming former FBI data analyst named Thomas Keane leaks hidden documents that point to a monstrous betrayal and becomes the most wanted man in the nation. Pursued by a shadowy agency determined to keep the official version sealed, Keane races to share the truth with a public reeling from revelations that might reshape the entire post-attack world order. If you find your eyes growing heavy at any point, that's okay. This story is meant to be richly detailed. Perhaps you'll drift to sleep while pondering how fear can become a profitable enterprise. Or maybe you'll stay riveted until the final word, uncovering each layer with breathless suspense. Either way, I hope you come away with new insights into how power, once obtained, can cling fiercely to the shadows. Shall we begin? Then settle in, let your breathing slow, and imagine the flicker of old computer screens, top-secret binders, and a few missing pages that change the course of entire nations. This is False Skies, told in 5 parts, each revealing a deeper rung of the labyrinth. Listen closely. The greatest secrets often hide in the quiet corners of official stories. Thomas Keane didn't feel like a revolutionary when he first pressed send. He was simply a man weighed down by guilt, holding a flash drive stuffed with revelations that had haunted him for years. The file name he'd chosen, Black Dust, gave no hint to the explosive contents. A trove of classified FBI memos, shipping manifests, and encrypted communications that, if authenticated, would confirm every darkest rumor about the worst terrorist attack in modern memory. The day of the leak dawned cloudy, ironically anticlimactic for a moment, that might reshape history. Keane sat in a dingy motel room near a dusty highway, a battered laptop perched on a wobbly table. The place smelled of stale coffee and regret, but it had functioning Wi-Fi. He checked his secure connection one last time, heart thrumming. With trembling fingers, he uploaded Black Dust to an overseas whistleblower website known for releasing hidden archives. He paused, typed a short note. For the thousands who died and the millions misled. Then he pressed send. Within the hour, that file reached multiple journalists and a global news outlet with a reputation for defying government censors. The outlet's editorial board pored over it, verifying bits of data in a hush of excitement and alarm. By the end of the day, the first breaking story appeared online, overshadowed by disclaimers. Unverified documents claimed to reveal inside plot behind 20-year-old attack. Skeptics rolled their eyes. Conspiracy theorists hailed it as the smoking gun they'd always wanted. Most mainstream media initially dismissed it as an editing glitch, a potential hoax, or AI-generated forgery. The official line insisted, yet some found the content too consistent to be random fakes. a set of typed memos from high-level intelligence briefings dated months before the attack, discussing the necessity of a catalytic event to unify public support for indefinite overseas campaigns. Detailed logs showed insurance policy expansions on certain tower floors days prior. Even stand-down orders for the certain war games suspiciously matched the real timeline. Keene watched from his motel room's flickering TV as a breathless anchor tried to explain the leak, disclaiming that the White House calls it foreign propaganda. He sighed. The official denial had begun. Next would come the manhunt for the leaker. He closed his laptop, stuffed it in a bag, and left the motel. Time to vanish. He'd served in the FBI's data analytics wing for nearly a decade, compiling anomaly reports around that fateful day. Step by step, he realized too many coincidences tied private defense contractors, intelligence heads, and financial bigwigs, all who profited from the subsequent wars. He quietly copied reams of old files, awaiting the day he had the courage to blow the whistle. That day had come. Elsewhere, powerful forces mobilized. The intelligence community's upper echelons recognized the name Thomas Keene from previous security audits. They suspected him within hours. Calls went out from a hush-hush division to find him, brand him as a threat to national security. The director of an ultra-secret agency, Eldridge Shaw, personally oversaw the containment plan. He believed the official story must remain unchallenged or the entire post-attack order might unravel. By midnight, bulletins labeled Keene suspected hacker and domestic threat. Agents started combing digital footprints, scouring camera feeds from near the FBI building. Shaw himself made a call to a contact at the large media conglomerates, instructing them to bury coverage of the story until further notice. The compliance was near instant. Mainstream news gave minimal airtime to the leak, overshadowing it with other headlines. But the genie was out of the bottle. On social media, the hashtag #OurBlackDust soared, with amateurs dissecting every memo line. A few data experts cross-referenced the IP addresses in the communications, linking them to known government subdomains. Even the partial revelation stunned the public. If the documents were genuine, it implied that some element within the U.S. and establishment not only predicted but abetted the terror event, ensuring maximum casualties for maximum political effect. The phrase "false skies" emerged, referencing how the public's reality had been manufactured like a painted ceiling above them, concealing the real orchestrators. Within a day, small protests flared outside federal buildings in major cities. People demanded clarity. The government's official statement repeated the forgery or foreign propaganda claim. That evening, hackers with anarchy streaks threatened to leak more verifying files if the mainstream media didn't pick it up. Tensions soared. Meanwhile, the stock market wobbled as rumors of insider deals from decades prior re-emerged. Some corporations connected to military contracting faced plunging shares. Keene watched from a safe house now, a friend's abandoned cabin in the woods. He had only the radio for news, and the swirl of distrust and fury filtered through the static. He dreaded how quickly the establishment might label him a traitor. Indeed, the next morning, the FBI publicly named him as a prime suspect in a mass leak of classified data, painting him as an extremist. His old colleagues, uncertain, gave no comment, but behind the scenes, many believed the documents might be real after all. They recognized Keene's skill in combing data for anomalies. Among the swirl stood a figure named Sarah Voss, an investigative journalist blacklisted from major networks for challenging official 9/11 narratives in the past. She recognized the pattern in these newly leaked documents. They matched puzzle pieces she'd glimpsed in hushed conversations with insiders. She reached out to the news site that hosted the files, leaving an encrypted message. "I can help verify. Let me speak to the source." That message eventually found its way to Keene via an online confidant, setting the stage for an alliance that might shake the entire narrative. Thus, from a dusty hideout, Keene typed a coded reply. The story's real race began. Could he deliver evidence to a credible journalist and blow the entire false narrative wide open before the apparatus of Homeland Security, the very system built on the official story, crushed him? The next step would be forging that alliance with Voss, and hoping her instincts for truth outweighed her fear of retribution. For if the government's darkest deception was about to be exposed, those who profited from war would not hesitate to silence him or anyone else to keep the official illusions intact. 2 days after the leak, the national conversation roiled in confusion. Official channels insisted the Black Dust documents were an elaborate hoax, yet smaller media sites posted side-by-side comparisons with legitimate CIA or FBI formatting, showing consistent digital footprints. The public found itself caught between an official narrative and a swirling impetus to question everything. Some believed wholeheartedly in the new revelations. Others recoiled or felt threatened by the idea that the last 2 decades of conflict might have been orchestrated. Thomas Keene was already on every national watch list. He'd been a mid-level FBI data analyst until 2 years prior, known for thoroughness but also for quietly raising flags about inconsistent intelligence reports pre-9/11. The day he left the bureau, no one suspected he'd spent months copying old files slated for permanent seal. Now, his old supervisors told the press that he was mentally unstable, harboring extremist theories. They withheld mention that those same theories had nearly led to internal inquiries years ago, until higher-ups quashed them. In a suburban neighborhood outside the capital, a black SUV pulled up to a modest house. 4 men in plain suits stepped out. They were from a specialized domestic counter-intel unit, effectively an arm of the Black Archive, a covert group rumored to be tied to intelligence and corporate interests. They forced the occupant, a middle-aged data engineer who once worked with Keene, to open his home computer. They rifled through his messages, seizing any mention of Thomas or Black Dust or files. This was repeated across multiple homes of ex-FBI colleagues, all without official warrants. The watchers answered to a higher chain, operating in the shadows. Director Eldridge Shaw, head of a new consolidated intelligence agency formed after 9/11, presided over these manhunts from a sleek government tower. He remembered the day of the attacks vividly, the chaos that allowed the Patriot Act and massive expansions of surveillance. He'd advanced quickly by endorsing these expansions and forging alliances with top defense contractors. Now, seeing the leaked documents threaten that entire architecture, Shaw was determined to snuff out the source. Keene, whatever his name is, must be found, he told subordinates. Oh, we cannot let fantasies unravel 2 decades of progress. As the manhunt escalated, Keene lurked in the outskirts. He recognized the checkpoints on highways, the routine scanning of license plates. He switched vehicles, used an old identity pass, and avoided all major city centers. He survived on snack bars and occasional small store purchases with cash only. At night, he found a cheap motel, paying in a borrowed name. Every moment felt like it might bring a black SUV squealing into the lot. The tension weighed on him, gnawing at his nerves. Sarah Voss, the investigative reporter, finally established contact with him through a secure chat app. "We need to meet," she wrote. "I can help verify these files properly. People trust me to an extent in the alternative media sphere. We must do it soon. The window is closing." Keene hesitated, knowing any in-person meeting risked being traced. But if they never took that risk, the documents might remain in a swirl of unverified rumor, easy for the mainstream to dismiss. They arranged a rendezvous in a small coastal town's library after hours the next day. As Keene approached the library, he spotted an unmarked sedan idling in the parking lot. Fear pricked him. Watchers might be tailing to confirm. He looped around the block. The sedan didn't move, possibly just a random visitor. Summoning courage, he stepped inside. Voss, a tall woman with a worn leather jacket, recognized him from the scattered photos circulated in the media. They sat in a corner among dusty shelves. She offered a handshake, voice calm but urgent. "Thomas, I believe you. The official story has always had holes. Let's finalize the proof so we can break it wide open." Keene exhaled relief, sliding a small USB drive across the table. "This is a more complete set than what was posted. Contains direct memos about the stand-down orders, the deals with defense contractors, the flight path manipulations. Also, internal emails referencing the hijackers as assets gone rogue." He paused, tears flickering in his eyes. "They used the tragedy for indefinite war, Sarah. They let it happen, or worse, engineered it." Sarah's breath caught. She skimmed a few files on her laptop, eyes widening at references to bank accounts, coded references to Operation Silence. She nodded. "This is explosive, but we need a big platform, enough to force coverage. If we just post it on my blog, they'll discredit or block it. We'll get shut down." She explained a plan. Find a mainstream journalist with a rebellious streak, or do a well-publicized live event that too many watchers can't black out entirely. Suddenly, a muffled scuffle at the library entrance startled them. A figure in dark clothes peered in. Keene tensed. Sarah pressed the laptop closed. They ducked behind shelves as footsteps approached, but the library's old caretaker bumbled out, greeting them obliviously. The suspicious figure glimpsed through the glass retreated, possibly a false alarm, possibly a watcher verifying the location. They parted ways quickly, agreeing to meet again in 48 hours near a major city, planning an infiltration of a local news station that might still allow an unfiltered broadcast. Danger soared. If watchers caught wind of their plan, they'd likely come down with lethal force. That evening, Keene received a frantic text from a friend who had once helped him interpret old FBI logs. "One of our guys is dead. A boat accident. They're picking us off." The message cut short. Keene shuddered. The watchers had begun eliminating secondary sources who could confirm the leak's authenticity. He realized the ephemeral window for truth was closing. On the streets, protests flared up as rumors swirled of official foreknowledge. Some saw it as disrespectful to the memory of the victims. Others believed the truth must come out, no matter how painful. The government, for its part, ramped up a rhetorical war on misinformation. Director Shaw delivered a short, ominous address, vowing that domestic agitators spreading baseless conspiracies will be brought to justice. Amid the swirling chaos, Sarah discovered partial references in the documents to a deeper archive. The Saturn Files, an intelligence ledger tracking post-attack financial flows from the official budgets to clandestine owners. If they found that ledger's location, they could show the money trail behind the war expansions. That might be the final nail in the coffin of the official story. They needed it, but time was short. Thus, the manhunt overshadowed all. Helicopters roamed certain highways. Random car searches increased, and the populace grew uneasy, sensing the government's fear that the leak might be real. He ducked from motel to motel, adopting new disguises. Soon, though, his luck would run out, or he'd have to risk a direct showdown, trusting the thunder of public outrage to keep him alive. Little did he realize the watchers were about to tighten the net, deploying a Black Ops team to ensure the leak never reached unstoppable momentum. If Keene couldn't outmaneuver them long enough to break the final evidence, the official illusions would remain intact. If he did, though, the entire structure of post-attack governance might collapse. The next moves would determine everything. The following week saw Thomas Keene evading watchers by day and collaborating with Sarah Voss by night, each meeting more urgent than the last. They discovered references to the Saturn files scattered in older CIA memos. Allegedly, it was an encrypted database that meticulously traced the money funneling to defense contractors, oil conglomerates, and political campaigns in the immediate weeks after the catastrophic event. If authentic, it would confirm the real motive behind the orchestrated false flag: indefinite war and profiteering. At a safe house borrowed from an old contact of Sarah's, they pored over these hints by lamplight. Among the digital shards was a location clue: a retired NSA facility on the outskirts of a southwestern desert, defunct but rumored to store old backups. "We find that offline archive," Sarah said. "We can copy the Saturn files in raw form. That's the smoking gun." Keene nodded, though dread of infiltration weighed on him. Between them, they had minimal resources: a battered car, a few thousand in cash, and a handful of laptops. The Watchers, on the other hand, had near limitless means: drones, infiltration teams, access to every camera feed in the nation. But the Watchers didn't fully expect them to attempt a break-in at a presumably abandoned facility, so maybe the element of surprise worked in their favor. Director Eldridge Shaw ramped up the clampdown. The official narrative shaped the public mind. A rogue ex-FBI analyst has unleashed foreign-forged documents aimed at undermining national security. Many believed it, but a growing minority saw government overreach, especially after multiple suspicious accidents claimed the lives of other potential whistleblowers. People asked, if it's so false, why chase and kill so aggressively? In one instance, a known data archivist was found shot in his home, with the press labeling it a botched robbery, ignoring the data archivist's link to the leaked material. On social media, black dust soared. Some city squares erupted in protest, carrying signs that read, "We deserve the truth or stop killing our whistleblowers." The Watchers responded by intensifying arrests, calling them rioters. Keene tried to remain focused. He realized that if the Saturn files were real, it might show direct bank transfers from major corporate boards into the pockets of certain officials, all tied to legislation passing huge war budgets after the false flag. That would upend the entire post-attack establishment. "No wonder they're stopping at nothing," Sarah murmured, securing fake IDs. They traveled cross-country by back roads, each a motel they used for a single night, paying cash. They dodged major highways, suspecting license plate readers. The Watchers likely guessed their aim was to expose more data, but might not know the exact target. Meanwhile, the tension between them soared. The climate was near police state. Newscasts repeated that the domestic terrorist Thomas Keene must be turned in. Civilians were promised big rewards for tips. Billboards with Keene's face popped up along highways. He wore a baseball cap and used tinted glasses, but each day was a dice roll. A near encounter on a lonely stretch. A black SUV sped behind them. They recognized the pattern. Sarah swerved onto a side route, forging through a small farmland path. The Watchers gave chase. Shots rang out, blowing a tire. The car careened into a ditch. They scrambled out, hid among tall corn. The Watchers searched, but eventually gave up, presumably to avoid a big scene. This brush with violent capture left them rattled, but also more resolved. "We're obviously on the right track if they're that desperate," Sarah said, breath shaky. Finally, after days, they reached the deserted perimeter of the old NSA outpost. It was ringed by a crumbling fence, a few rusted signposts. By the look of the cracked asphalt and weed-choked yard, it had been abandoned for over a decade. Perfect place to bury secrets. Under twilight, they found a corner of the fence cut open by looters. They slipped inside quietly. The main building rose in silhouette, windows boarded up. A stray coyote howled in the distance, wind carrying a faint metallic whistling from open vents. Inside, dust-coated floors, old cubicles sat in disarray. They used flashlights to navigate. Eventually, they located a sublevel with battered computer racks. A few beeped faintly with emergency power. "There's power. That's suspicious," Keene muttered. Indeed, it suggested the Watchers might still be pulling some data from here. They approached a locked door labeled Server Vault Archive 6. With the Sarah's phone, they scanned a partial code from the documents, generating a bypass sequence that might override older system locks. After multiple tries, a green light flickered. The vault door clanked open. Inside the vault, rows of drives and reels lined metal shelves, dusty but humming with minimal climate control. They sifted through labels. Operation Cast Peak, Post-K War Roster, Saturn, that was it. A battered cluster of servers with the word Saturn FSV. They carefully powered one terminal, hooking it to a laptop. Sarah typed a root command. The screen glowed, Restricted Saturn 123, Enter Pass. They tried typical keywords from the docs. On the third attempt, a beep, Access. They were in. Files scrolled, each referencing massive funding authorizations, building demolitions, insider trading logs dated within days of the big attack. The scope was monstrous. It implicated high-level bureaucrats, big banks, and even a few journalists. They orchestrated the tragedy to galvanize fear, pass endless war budgets, feed the arms economy, Sarah whispered, stunned, all hidden under national security drapery. Some lines suggested hijackers were known assets used as a controlled ignition. The betrayal was staggering. In that hush, footsteps upstairs. The Watchers had arrived, no doubt detecting the power usage. "We must copy this now," Keene said, launching a data transfer to multiple external drives. Meanwhile, Sarah prepared to kill lights and hide, but the Watchers rushed down, flashlights slicing through gloom. Gunfire echoed, bullets pinged off server racks. Sarah huddled behind a console, returning fire with the small pistol she carried. Keene initiated an upload, hooking the server to a secure satellite link via a portable router. The Watchers advanced. He typed frantically, the progress bar inching along. Transmission at 10%. Then Director Shaw himself stepped in. "Stop!" he roared, voice reverberating in the metal corridor. "Keene, you have no idea what you're unleashing. The stability of entire alliances depends on bearing that day's complexities." Shots resumed. Sarah took a graze to her shoulder but kept the Watchers pinned. The bar reached 50%. Shaw barked an order to lob a small explosive. They tossed a flashbang. The ear-shattering pop disoriented them. The Watchers closed in, tackling Sarah. Another pinned Keene. The laptop screen cracked under a boot. The upload froze at 80%. In the struggle, Keene twisted free, smashing a guard's face with the laptop, which ironically forced the laptop back to life. The Watchers tried to pull cables. Meanwhile, a stray bullet hit a server coolant line. Steam hissed. The infiltration team realized this was too risky. The entire place might go up. Shaw advanced on Keene, gun raised. "You can die here with your illusions, or you can vanish quietly. The truth will never see daylight." Suddenly, an explosion from the coolant line triggered a chain reaction in the old power system. Fire licked the corners, sending Watchers scrambling. Sarah crawled to safety. Keene, battered, saw the upload bar at 98%. He roared in defiance, pressing a final keystroke to confirm. The system beeped. Success. The watchers realized the data had been sent out, unstoppable now. Furious, one aimed at Keen's chest. A final shot rang out. Darkness overcame him. The watchers yanked the cable, but it was too late. The Saturn files had presumably reached a safe node on the open web. Alarms beeped. The facility's meltdown forced a hurried retreat. In the swirling smoke, Sarah was dragged away by an explosion's concussive wave. The watchers grabbed Shaw, retreating. The entire sublevel in flame and dust. For all they knew, Keen perished under the rubble. But the watchers had lost the bigger war. The Saturn files were free. Within hours, a torrent of new evidence, the Saturn files, flooded the internet. Anonymous activists, archivists, and journalists worldwide mirrored the data, even as official agencies tried to block or discredit it. The story soared across social media, overshadowing government censorship efforts. Original documents, codenamed Operation White Door, some Project Switchboard commissioned for a filter sum, provided stark details. Insider collusion with extremist groups, advanced planning to ensure that attacks triggered panic and indefinite war mobilization, international reaction. Allies demanded urgent clarifications from Washington. Rival nations called for an emergency UN session. The general public, seeing internal memos where top officials weighed acceptable civilian losses for strategic advantage, reeled in fury. Large-scale protests ignited in multiple capitals. People demanded resignations. The entire intelligence apparatus faced the biggest crisis of legitimacy since the day it was formed. Meanwhile, the White House insisted the documents were tampered forgeries, but the mass of cross-corroboration was overwhelming. Anonymous data scientists validated digital signatures, timestamps, usage logs consistent with 20-year-old records. Even some mid-level intelligence employees, shaken by the revelations, publicly confirmed the authenticity. Back home in the U.S., the meltdown was immediate. Rallies erupted outside major government buildings, calling for arrests of those named in the files. Corporate board members from arms manufacturing companies faced lawsuits. The stock market dived, particularly for defense sector stocks. Over time, entire boards resigned, some fleeing the country. Various retired generals, disclaiming involvement or giving partial confessions, fueled headlines. The public found itself torn between anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, reliving the trauma of that fateful day under a horrifying new lens. Media torn. Some mainstream outlets quickly pivoted, acknowledging the new data as genuine after initial attempts to bury it. High-profile anchors apologized for previously parroting the official story. Others doubled down on patriotic narratives, ironically fueling further distrust. The swirl of disinformation versus actual data soared, but the raw evidence was too extensive to suppress. "You can't close the barn door after the horses fled," a commentator said. "The entire architecture of post-attack policy is under question." Director Eldridge Shaw attempted a grand press conference to reassert authority, but the crowd drowned him in jeers. Calls for congressional hearings soared. In a last-chance effort, Shaw's office declared a national security emergency, urging martial law to keep order. That, ironically, only inflamed dissent. Certain states refused to cooperate. Over the next weeks, the old alignment of power began fracturing. Investigations launched from multiple angles, with newly emboldened lawmakers prosecuting those who orchestrated the post-attack expansions for personal gain. Sarah Voss emerged from the Southwestern fiasco battered but alive. She revealed how watchers had infiltrated that abandoned NSA site, how Keen died a hero finalizing the upload. She published a moving column titled "One Man's Last Key Press," describing how, in a swirl of gunfire, Keen completed the Saturn files transmission, ensuring no one could bury it. The piece went viral, shaping the public's view of Keene as a tragic whistleblower who gave everything for the truth. At the local level, families of 9/11 victims demanded new trials. The old official commissions were discredited. People realized entire reams of contradictory evidence had been sealed. Even the original investigators admitted they'd been misled or threatened. The emotional toll soared once more. Many felt as though they'd been lied to for decades about the biggest national tragedy. A wave of introspection overcame the country. How had fear become so profitable, and how did good people allow it? Internationally, alliances that had supported the war on terror felt betrayed. Some withdrew forces from contested regions. Others launched their own parliamentary investigations, suspecting shared complicity. The world order that was shaped after the attack started crumbling, replaced by an uncertain future. Some dared to hope it meant a less militarized approach. Others worried that new extremist groups might exploit the chaos. In the midst of all this, rumors circulated that Thomas Keene might still be alive. Sightings in some far-off place, yet no concrete proof existed. Official statements considered him presumed deceased. If he survived, he might have chosen the anonymity of an unknown identity, having done what he set out to do. 6 months later, a massive Senate hearing convened. Top officials were subpoenaed. The public watched enthralled as ex-generals, ex-CEOs, and ex-administration figures from 20 years prior faced grilling. Some invoked national security, others pled the Fifth, while a few confessed partial roles. Indictments followed, though not all ended in convictions. The system was too vast, too intricately rigged, yet the symbolic effect was undeniable. Never again would the official story be accepted unchallenged. At the same time, Sarah Voss launched an independent media platform, broadcasting daily updates on the False Skies inquiry. People from across the spectrum contributed testimonies, documents, or personal stories of how they'd suspected hush-ups. Freed from blacklists, she soared as a public figure, championing the cause of government accountability. A year after the Saturn Files meltdown, a new memorial was erected near the site of the original 9/11 tragedy. A statue depicting a single figure pressing a key, a reflection of Keene's final act. The inscription read, "They took truth from us in the shadows. He brought it back in the light." Visitors left flowers, some seeking solace that the realm of power had at least partially been unmasked. Epilogue. In a quiet coastal town, a fisherman swore he recognized a man from a circulated photo. Older, hair bleached by salt and sun, eyes weighed with sadness. The man told him he used to work for the government, but no more. He spoke of illusions and the cost of unveiling them. Then he vanished at sunrise, leaving only a single battered flash drive behind. If it was Thomas Keene, he apparently chose a wandering fate, letting the world handle the legacy of his bombshell leak. Public trust in large institutions remained shaken. Some remained furious, others hopeful that a new transparency might arise. In the corners of the internet, conspiracy watchers debate if the watchers still exist, planning new false flags. But for now, the greatest deception in modern times has been laid bare. The name Black Dust stands as a testament to the unstoppable power of truth once it's unleashed. In the hush that follows the final note, they used fear to shape the world, but one day fear lost. The truth soared free, and the illusions that once cloaked the skies were shattered in a single day. Some say it's based on classified information that was never meant to reach public ears. Tonight, we explore the darkest corners of government experimentation and the thin membrane between dimensions. Daniel Cross bolted upright in his bed, sweat-drenched sheets twisted around his legs like restraints. The dream had returned, more vivid this time. underground tunnels bathed in pulsing blue light, the cold metal chair, the leather straps on his wrists, and the voices, always the voices, echoing through concrete chambers. Subject 17 demonstrates exceptional receptivity, increased neural amplitude by 30%. His bedroom television flickered with static, though he was certain he'd turned it off before going to sleep. From within the dancing gray pixels came a familiar hum, a sequence of tones just below normal hearing threshold. Something about it pulled at the corners of his mind, like fingers trying to pry open a locked door. Daniel stumbled out of bed and approached the screen, mesmerized. Within the chaos of white noise, patterns emerged. Geometric formations that shouldn't exist in random static. His reflection in the screen looked foreign, almost like another person watching him from behind the glass. Delta Protocol 17, he whispered, the words rising unbidden from some hidden chamber of memory. Initiate phase bend. The static intensified, the hum growing to an electric whine that made his fillings ache. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the television went black. Daniel stood there trembling in the dark, wondering why tears were streaming down his face. In the morning, he convinced himself it had been nothing but a particularly vivid nightmare. But as he brushed his teeth, he noticed something unsettling in the bathroom mirror. A small red mark behind his ear, perfectly circular, like a healed puncture wound. He had no memory of receiving it. As the days passed, the dreams intensified, always the same elements. The underground facility, scientists in lab coats, the chair with its cruel restraints, and tests. Endless tests, designed to push the boundaries of his mind. In each dream he was younger, perhaps 11 or 12 years old, weathered face, a map of regret. Jesus, you grew up. Last time I saw you, you were just a skinny kid with too much power in your head. What did they do to me? Nichols sighed, reaching into his pocket for a pack of cigarettes. His hands trembled slightly as he lit one. You were special, even among the sensitives. Most of the children could receive impressions, maybe move small objects, but you could create doorways. Doorways to where? That was the question, wasn't it? At first, they were just focused on remote viewing, psychically observing distant locations. Then they realized some of you kids could not just see, but reach. And you, Daniel, you could open gates that others could step through. The old man took a long drag from his cigarette. They started small. Different rooms in the facility, then different points in time. Just minutes at first, then hours, then years. By 82, they had you opening doorways to other places entirely. The beast, Daniel said quietly. Nichols' face went ashen. You remember? I found a recording. Then you know what happened. What came through wasn't from another place on Earth, not even from another time. It was from somewhere else, somewhere that operates under different physical laws. Nichols stubbed out his cigarette with more force than necessary. We lost 16 people that day before they cut the power. And the thing, it didn't die. It just folded back into dimensions we can't perceive. Daniel's head throbbed with half-formed memories. They shut it down after that? Officially, yes. The Montauk project was terminated, the facility sealed. But you know better, don't you? Nichols fixed him with a penetrating stare. They just went deeper underground, compartmentalized. The work continued. But I don't remember anything after that day. I have a whole life. School, college, my job. Artificial memories, very sophisticated. The best MK-Ultra techniques combined with targeted chemical therapy. They built you a new identity, brick by brick. Nichols glanced around nervously. The question is, why are you remembering now? The programming doesn't just break down on its own. Before Daniel could respond, his vision split like a double-exposure photograph. Overlaid on the present scene was another image. The same lighthouse, but under clear blue skies, with Nichols wearing different clothes. "Happening again," Nichols was saying, his voice echoing strangely as the two realities flickered and merged. "The temporal distortions are getting worse." Daniel gripped the bench, nauseated by the visual discord. "What's happening to me? Time is bleeding through. Your connection to the Montauk chair was never fully severed, it just went dormant." Nichols leaned closer, his face shifting subtly between older and younger versions of himself. "Listen carefully. There's an access point they never sealed. Bunker 14, near the old power station. The equipment is still there. You need to—" The world around them rippled like disturbed water. A crushing pressure built inside Daniel's skull as reality itself seemed to stutter. When it stabilized, Nichols was gone. In his place sat a teenage boy with a familiar face. Nichols, 50 years younger, wearing a Camp Hero security badge. "Find the fail-safe before it's too late," the boy continued in Nichols' elderly voice, seemingly unaware of his transformed state. "They're trying to recreate the conditions from '83, but they don't understand the danger. The membrane between worlds is thinner now, weakened by the original experiments." The young Nichols flickered and was replaced by the old man again. He clutched Daniel's arm with surprising strength. "Go back to Camp Hero. Find Bunker 14. Destroy the chair before they can use it again." Another wave of temporal distortion washed over them. When it passed, Daniel was alone on the bench. A family of tourists walked by, giving him curious looks as he sat there, pale and shaking. That night, Daniel returned to Camp Hero under cover of darkness. The perimeter fence posed little challenge. He remembered where the security systems had blind spots, knowledge surfacing from decades past. The ranger station was dark and empty. He made his way through the abandoned base, guided by memories that grew stronger with each step. The power station stood silent, its massive turbines long still. Behind it, half hidden by encroaching vegetation, was a small concrete structure with a faded 14 stenciled on its rusted door. The lock had been broken recently. Inside, a metal staircase descended into darkness. Daniel followed it down, the beam of his flashlight illuminating walls that transitioned from concrete to natural bedrock. The air grew colder, charged with an electrical scent that made the hairs on his arm stand up. At the bottom, a long corridor stretched before him. As he walked, temporal distortions intensified. In flashes, he saw the corridor as it had been, brightly lit, staffed by busy technicians and armed guards. He heard snippets of conversation from 40 years ago, saw ghostly figures pass through him as past and present overlapped. The corridor ended at a massive vault door, standing partially open. Beyond it lay the heart of the Montauk project, a cavernous chamber housing equipment that should have been removed decades ago. And at its center stood the chair. Even inactive, it radiated a sense of wrongness, a technology that should not exist, built from principles science had yet to discover. Surrounding it were banks of computers and equipment in various states of repair. Some appeared anciently obsolete, others looked surprisingly modern. Most disturbing of all were the signs of recent activity. Fresh cables ran to newly installed equipment. Toolboxes lay open on workbenches, and a whiteboard was covered with complex equations and a countdown schedule. According to the board, whatever they were planning would happen tomorrow night. As Daniel approached the chair, his consciousness began to splinter. He was simultaneously his present self and his child self, experiencing both timelines at once. In one reality, he stood before the dormant machine as an adult. In the other, he was strapped into it as technicians calibrated its settings. "Good morning, Daniel," said a voice from both past and present. "We've been waiting for you to return." Daniel turned to find Dr. Bennett stepping from the shadows. Older now, his hair silver instead of brown, but with the same cold blue eyes. "You," Daniel whispered. "You're still running this? Did you think we'd abandon the most important scientific breakthrough in human history?" Bennett circled him slowly. Especially after what you showed us was possible. You need to shut this down. You don't understand what you're doing." "On the contrary, we understand far better now." Bennett gestured to the upgraded equipment. "We've spent 40 years refining the technology, studying the data from the original experiments. The incident in '83 was a momentary setback. 16 people died. Progress requires sacrifice." Bennett's voice hardened. "And now you've returned, exactly as our models predicted. The prodigal son drawn back at precisely the right moment." Daniel backed away, moving toward the chair. "I came to destroy it. You came because you're still connected to it. Because on a quantum level, you've never left that chair." Bennett nodded to someone behind Daniel. "Your memories, your independent life, they were never real. Just a holding pattern while your mind matured into what we needed." Too late, Daniel sensed movement behind him. A sharp pain blossomed in his neck as a hypodermic needle sank into his flesh. The room tilted sideways as the sedative took hold. "Welcome home, Subject 17. Bennett said as darkness closed in. "Tomorrow you'll help us open the ultimate doorway." Daniel awoke, strapped to the chair, electrodes attached to his temples and chest. The bunker hummed with power. Banks of equipment were manned by technicians in white lab coats. Armed guards stood at attention along the walls. His mind felt clearer than it had in days. The chemical fog of suppressed memories finally lifted. He remembered everything now, his childhood, the tests, the growing fear among the scientists as they realized what they'd discovered, and most of all, the true nature of what had come through the gate in 1983. "Doctor," Bennett approached, clipboard in hand. "Consciousness has returned. Excellent. We have limited time before the window aligns." "You can't do this," Daniel said, straining against his restraints. "You saw what happened last time. A miscalculation. The entity was unstable in our dimensional framework." Bennett checked readings on a nearby monitor. "This time, we're better prepared. The integration will be controlled." Integration. Cold horror spread through Daniel's chest. "You're not just opening a doorway. You want to bring something through permanently?" Bennett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not something, Daniel. Someone. Or, perhaps, more accurately, someone's." He gestured toward a large display screen where images flashed in rapid sequence. Advanced technology, biological enhancements, weapons beyond current human capability. Our visitors have so much to offer: knowledge, power, evolutionary advancement. Bennett adjusted a dial, increasing power to the chair. "All they ask in return is a suitable environment, hosts who can withstand the integration process." "They're not visitors," Daniel said, the truth crystallizing in his mind. "They're invaders, and you're giving them the door code." Bennett ignored him, addressing the technicians. "Begin the initialization sequence. Power to 70%. The chair hummed to life, vibrating subtly beneath Daniel. Familiar sensations flooded his consciousness. The stretching feeling, as if his mind were being pulled from his body and extended across unseen dimensions. On monitors around the room, waveforms pulsed and danced. A technician called out readings. Quantum tunneling effect established, temporal aperture forming. Daniel closed his eyes, focusing inward. They thought they were in control, using him as a tool, but they'd forgotten something crucial, something even he had only just remembered. He wasn't just a key to open the door. He was the doorway itself. In 1983, when the beast had emerged, young Daniel had done something desperate. In the final moments, he had imprinted a failsafe into the quantum structure of the chair, a backdoor that only he could access. As the power built around him, Daniel reached into that hidden channel, his consciousness expanding beyond the confines of normal space-time. He could feel them waiting on the other side, vast intelligences, ancient and patient, pressing against the membrane between worlds like fingers testing a soap bubble's strength. And they were hungry. "Aperture at 60%, called a technician. "Dimensional breach imminent." Bennett leaned over Daniel, voice low and eager. "Can you feel them? They've waited so long to meet us properly." "Yes," Daniel whispered, his eyes still closed. "I can feel them, but they're not what you think." "Power surge," shouted a technician. "Systems drawing more than input capacity." Bennett whirled. "That's impossible. Check the—" "It's me," Daniel said, his voice oddly calm as blood began to trickle from his nose. "I'm the power source now. I always was." Around the room, equipment sparked and smoked. Lights flickered as power drained from all systems toward the chair. The metal beneath Daniel grew hot enough to scorch his skin, but he barely noticed the pain. At the center of the room, air began to twist and distort, reality folding like origami into impossible geometries. Through the forming aperture came glimpses of a realm beyond human comprehension. Vast architectures that defied Euclidean space, entities composed of light and thought rather than matter. "Yes," Bennett exulted, oblivious to the danger. "It's working." A technician grabbed his arm. "Sir, the subject's brainwave patterns are altering the protocol. He's changing the coordinates. Override him. Cut direct neural input." "We can't. He's bypassed the safeguards." Daniel opened his eyes, now glowing with an inner light that cast no shadows. When he spoke, his voice reverberated with harmonics that made glass surfaces throughout the bunker vibrate. "I'm not opening a door for them to come here," he said. "I'm creating a vacuum, a one-way passage." The aperture grew. Swirling darkness shot through with impossible colors. Air rushed toward it in a howling vortex. Loose objects began sliding across the floor. "What are you doing?" Bennett screamed over the maelstrom. "What I should have done 40 years ago." Daniel's restraints snapped as his body lifted slightly from the chair, suspended by forces beyond conventional physics. "I'm collapsing the bridge between worlds, permanently." The suction intensified. A guard lost his footing and slid, screaming, into the vortex, his body stretching bizarrely before vanishing. Others clutched desperately at bolted-down equipment. "You'll destroy everything." Bennett clawed his way toward a control panel. "Only the infection," Daniel replied. "The chair, the technology, the knowledge, everything that came through, everything that doesn't belong in our reality." With a sound like the universe tearing, the aperture expanded to engulf the chair itself. Metal warped and stretched as it was pulled into the void. Equipment imploded, circuitry unraveling at the atomic level as fundamental forces rewrote themselves around the collapsing gateway. Bennett made a final desperate lunge toward Daniel, face contorted with rage. We were so close. As the doctor's fingers brushed his arm, Daniel felt a moment of genuine pity. They were never going to share, Doctor. We weren't potential allies. We were cattle. The floor beneath them buckled as structural supports failed. Chunks of ceiling crashed down as the entire bunker began to collapse inward toward the hungry void. In the final moments before consciousness fled, Daniel saw something massive beginning to emerge from the aperture. not entering our world, but being pulled back to its own, the beast of Montauk, returning to its native dimension after 40 years of patient waiting in the spaces between worlds, its vast form registered in his human perception only as impressions, countless eyes, geometries that hurt to comprehend, and a telepathic voice that bypassed his ears to resonate directly in his mind. You have closed the way, but there are other doors, other keys. As darkness claimed him, Daniel directed one final surge of power into the collapsing gateway, sealing it with his consciousness as the lock. Daniel awoke to the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors. Sunlight streamed through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across starched white sheets. His body felt heavy. Every movement required a conscious effort. A nurse noticed he was awake and summoned a doctor. A kindly-faced woman who explained he had been found unconscious on the beach near Montauk Point, severely dehydrated and suffering from exposure. He had been in a coma for 6 days. When she asked what had happened to him, Daniel claimed not to remember. 3 days later, he checked himself out against medical advice. His apartment, when he returned to it, had been searched with professional thoroughness. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but he could feel the intrusion like a psychic fingerprint on every surface. His computer was gone, as were his notebooks filled with memories and sketches. In their place sat a slim manila folder containing a single document, a government position offer with the Department of Energy at a salary triple his current one. The message was clear. Forget what happened, take the money, live a comfortable life under watchful eyes. Daniel burned the offer and set to work. Over the next week, he purchased equipment from various sources: a high-end laptop paid for in cash, specialized broadcasting gear from hobbyist shops, components that could be assembled into a transmission system powerful enough to reach audiences beyond normal channels. In a cheap motel room, paid for under a false name, he connected the final wires and activated the system. The setup was crude but effective, capable of piggybacking on existing broadcast networks and digital platforms, inserting his message into the stream of constant information that flowed through modern society. Daniel positioned himself before the camera and began recording. My name is Daniel Cross. Until recently, I was Subject 17 of a classified government program known as the Montauk Project. What I'm about to tell you sounds like fiction. I wish it were. But Montauk wasn't some urban legend. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. It is real. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, at the decommissioned Camp Hero Air Force Base in Montauk, New York, the government conducted experiments in mind control, teleportation, and dimensional manipulation. They used children with psychic abilities. I was one of those children. They discovered that the human mind, properly augmented and focused through what they called the Montauk chair, could do more than just bend spoons or read thoughts. It could tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. Through these experiments, contact was made with entities from beyond our dimension. The scientists thought they were communicating with advanced beings who would share knowledge and technology. They didn't understand what they were really dealing with. These entities, I don't know what to call them except perhaps predators, they wanted access to our world. Not to share, not to help, but to colonize, to consume. They found willing collaborators among power-hungry men who didn't understand what they were inviting in. In 1983, there was an incident. Something came through partially. We called it the Beast. 16 people died. Officially, the project was supposedly shut down, but it never truly ended. They just went deeper underground, fragmented the research across multiple black sites. Last week, they tried again. They brought me back, their most successful gate opener, to create a permanent doorway between dimensions. But I collapsed the gateway instead, destroying the Montauk chair and sealing the breach. Daniel paused. wiping blood that had begun to trickle from his nose. I don't know how long I have before they find me. The entities can't come through directly anymore, but their influence remains. They've compromised people in positions of power, not through some sci-fi body snatching, but through whispered promises, glimpses of knowledge no human was meant to possess. The technology created at Montauk still exists in fragmented form. The research continues under different code names, different facilities. Watch for signs, unusual military installations, clusters of missing children with unusual abilities, weather anomalies that defy explanation. These are the fingerprints of operations continuing what Montauk began. I'm uploading documentation with this broadcast. Images, partial research notes, coordinates of suspected continuation sites. I've hidden additional evidence in secure locations that will be released automatically if anything happens to me. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, fundamentally wrong, in a way you can't explain, pay attention to that feeling. The membrane between worlds has been weakened. Sometimes things slip through, even without a gate as large as the one they tried to create. They made us forget, but memory is a dangerous thing. Daniel leaned closer to the camera, his eyes haunted but determined, especially when it remembers the future. The recording ended there. Daniel uploaded it along with scanned copies of the documents he'd recovered. He used specialized distribution protocols to seed the files across countless servers worldwide, too dispersed to be completely erased, too widespread to be dismissed as the ravings of a single disturbed individual. As the final upload completed, his laptop screen flickered with static. From within the electronic noise, patterns emerged, the same signal that had called to him from his television weeks ago. But this time, Daniel recognized it for what it was. A beacon. Not from them, but from others like him, children of Montauk awakening to their suppressed memories, reaching out across the digital void. He wasn't alone. Daniel closed the laptop and packed his few remaining possessions. Through the thin motel curtains, he could see two black SUVs pulling into the parking lot. Men in dark suits emerged, moving with the coordinated precision of government operatives. They were too late. The truth was out, now propagating through networks they couldn't fully control. His testimony would reach millions before they could contain it. Seeds of awareness planted in receptive minds. Daniel sat calmly on the edge of the bed, waiting for the inevitable knock on the door. He wasn't afraid anymore. He understood now that what had happened at Montauk had changed him permanently. The powers they had awakened in him hadn't disappeared. They had merely gone dormant, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. As the heavy footsteps approached his door, Daniel closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, searching for the quantum threads that connected all points in space-time. There were other places he could go, other times. After all, he had been their best gate opener. The door burst open. 2 agents rushed in, weapons drawn. They found an empty room. The window was still closed and locked from the inside. The bathroom vacant. On the bed lay Daniel's phone, screen displaying a text message addressed to Dr. Bennett. There are other doors, other keys, and now I have them all. 3 days later, on computer screens across the world, a single symbol appeared momentarily before vanishing. A triangle intersecting with a perfect circle. The Montauk Project was never officially acknowledged. Those who spoke too publicly about it suffered accidents or disappeared. The broadcast was discredited, its evidence dismissed as elaborate hoaxes. But something had changed. People began to notice things they'd overlooked before. Children reported strange dreams of underground facilities and tests. Researchers documented unexplained temporal anomalies near certain government installations. And occasionally, in the white noise between radio stations or in the static of untuned televisions, listeners reported hearing a voice just on the edge of comprehension, repeating the same warning. They made us forget, but memory is a dangerous thing, especially when it remembers the future.